Did you ever feel the raw, burning injustice of being judged by your job title? Have you ever been dismissed as just the help, an invisible piece of machinery whose sole purpose is to serve the arrogant? Now, imagine this. You're standing at the cash register, earning an honest wage, when an entitled executive calls you obsolete, records your humiliation, and broadcasts your firing to the world. What would you do? Scream? Cry? Or would you silently calculate the cost of buying the company that just threw you away? How much does it cost to buy back your dignity? $11 million and a single decisive vote. Before we dive into the extraordinary chronicle of David Peterson's reckoning, the story of how an obsolete cashier traded his uniform for a controlling share of the entire corporation, do us a favor. If you believe that true value always defeats arrogance, hit that like button, share this with anyone who's ever felt invisible, and most importantly, subscribe to the Reckoning Files. We deal in justice, one painful, public executive defeat at a time. Now, let the counting begin. Chapter 1. The Final Register Ring. It was 4:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because the clock above aisle 4 was always 5 minutes fast, and I was mentally calculating when my shift ended. I was serving a customer I'd seen before, a man named Mr. Harrington. He was one of those people who treated the checkout line less like a transaction and more like a necessary evil he endured between his more important corporate meetings. Mr. Harrington was always sharply dressed, reeking faintly of expensive cigar smoke and entitlement. He always bought the same things: organic single-source coffee, imported cheese, and premium pet food for a pampered cat. He never made eye contact. He simply pushed his items onto the belt, waiting for me to perform my task efficiently and silently. But today was different. Today, he was on a conference call, holding his sleek silver phone to his ear, his voice booming over the soft grocery store music. He was complaining loudly about disruptive subordinates and the absolute failure of cost management. He didn't even bother to mute himself. The items scanned through quickly. Beep, beep, beep. I reached his final item, a large bag of specialized high-protein cat food. "That'll be $112.38, I said, my voice quiet and neutral. Mr. Harrington waved his hand dismissively, continuing his call. He slapped his card onto the reader without looking. The machine flashed an error. Card declined. The moral dichotomy of the moment was stark. Here was a man complaining about vast corporate failures, yet his personal card wouldn't cover a bag of cat food. "Sir," I murmured, leaning slightly forward, trying to keep the matter discreet. "Your card was declined. Could you please try another?" He pulled the phone slightly away from his ear, his eyes finally focusing on me, but not seeing me, seeing only the obstacle. His expression was one of profound irritation, like I was a broken machine requiring repair. "It's a company card, you idiot," he snapped, loud enough that the woman bagging groceries next to me flinched. "Run it again. Your machine is clearly malfunctioning. Don't waste my time." I didn't argue. That was the rule. Always assume the customer's right, even when they're calling you an idiot. I ran the card again. Card declined. "I sincerely apologize, sir," I said, my tone patient and worn from years of practice. "It appears the machine is reading an issue with the card itself. Do you have an alternative method of payment, or should I hold the items?" He wasn't finished. His eyes narrowed, and a slow, cruel smirk spread across his face, the look of a man who saw a perfect minor scapegoat for his own current frustration. He pulled his phone out completely, stopping his conference call. But crucially, he didn't hang up. He hit the record button. "You know what?" he announced, his voice booming across the store. "This is exactly the kind of incompetence I pay good money to avoid. Let me show your management what failure looks like." He started speaking directly to his phone's camera, narrating his humiliation like a sportscaster. The strong hook of my ruin was being broadcast live. "Look at this," he said, holding the camera up, making sure my worn face and my employee tag, David, were clearly visible. A cashier, likely a retired failure, incapable of operating a basic POS system. This is what Buy-Mart hires, an extra mouth that adds zero value but costs me valuable time. I am an executive at Continental Retail Group, the parent company that owns this sad little chain, and I can tell you right now, this man is obsolete. You're too slow. You're clearly mentally challenged, and you cost us money. "You are fired." My breath caught. I didn't say a word. The noise in the store, the music, the chatter, suddenly dissolved into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The shame wasn't just my own. It was the total, utter public humiliation of my quiet dignity being stripped away by a powerful man who considered my very existence an affront to efficiency. I could feel the stares of the other customers. That was the final, devastating blow. Not the word fired, but the contemptuous, unwarranted judgment delivered with such self-important cruelty. I stood there, gripping the register counter, practicing the power of silence I had always relied on. My entire body wanted to scream that his card was the problem, that I was a human being, that I deserved respect. But years of corporate training kept the words locked behind my teeth. "You are obsolete." Mark Harrington's voice echoed one last time as he yanked his card back, leaving the premium goods scattered on the belt. "And I'll make sure management sees this video. Enjoy your retirement, failure." He walked out, leaving the chaos, the abandoned items, and the shattered pieces of my pride behind. The quiet beep of the register, the sound of my life, was finally replaced by a deafening, cold silence. I knew then that the shame was deep enough to drown me, but the fire it sparked was enough to resurrect me. My shift was over. My life as David the Cashier was over, and Mr. Harrington had just bought himself a front row seat to a reckoning he never saw coming. I hadn't lost my job yet, but I knew I would. And when I did, the first thing I would do is find out exactly what Continental Retail Group owned. Chapter 2. The Viral Video and the Firing. When Mr. Harrington walked out of the Buy Mart, he didn't just leave a half-scanned cart. He left behind a vacuum of silence that was worse than any noise. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands, trained by years of repetition, managed to process the next two customers. I was moving on muscle memory, the man talking to the camera still echoing in my ears. "You are obsolete. You are fired." I finished my shift in a daze. No one looked at me directly. They looked around me, their faces registering a strange mixture of curiosity and immediate withdrawal. It's a terrible thing to realize you've become radioactive. I drove home, the quiet of my truck amplifying the dreadful certainty that the video was already out there. The moment a powerful, entitled man calls a working man obsolete, the world stops to listen. It's a satisfying narrative for people who believe failure is always deserved. I didn't have to wait long for the confirmation. Later that evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman who bakes excellent zucchini bread, came over, her face a mask of concern. She didn't have to say anything. The way she clutched her phone told the story. "David, honey, you need to see this," she murmured, her voice laced with pity. There it was, blurry, poorly framed, but unmistakable. The viral nightmare. The video, titled something sensational like "Buy Mart's Worst Employee," when entitlement meets incompetence, was everywhere. It had hundreds of thousands of views already. Mr. Harrington's dramatic narration, his expensive suit, his furious finger-pointing, played perfectly against my own worn vest and quiet attempts at dignity. I watched myself, a ghost on the screen. The comments were a torrent of anonymous cruelty. "Fire him. These old guys just slow everything down." "Should have been retired 10 years ago. Get a robot." "Extra mouth that costs money. Executive is right." That last comment, "extra mouth that costs money," sliced through me the deepest. It wasn't about the transaction. It was about the fundamental belief that my worth was defined purely by my cost-benefit ratio, and that I failed the test. I had spent my life working, paying taxes, never asking for a handout, and now my life was summarized by a sneering executive and judged by a chorus of faceless digital malice. The shame was a crushing weight. It was the absolute, total realization of rock bottom. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. Crying would have felt like giving Mr. Harrington the final satisfaction. Instead, I sat in the dark, my fingers tracing the outline of the cheap, worn Buy Mart vest I'd hung over my kitchen chair. I was a failure in the most public, digital way possible. The call came precisely at 9:02 a.m. the next morning. It was Mr. Jenkins, the store manager. Mr. Jenkins was a decent man, a career middle manager, trapped between corporate dictates and real life. He hated confrontation. His voice, usually hearty, was thin and brittle. "David, you need to come in right away. Corporate needs a meeting," he stammered. I knew what the meeting was. I drove to the store one last time. Jenkins' office was small, windowless, and smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation. He was sitting behind his cheap veneer desk, his face pasty white. Across from him sat a younger woman in a severely structured black suit. HR, cold and utterly professional. radiating the pure, impersonal authority of Continental Retail Group. "David," Jenkins began, avoiding my eyes, shuffling papers. "This is Ms. Reyes from Human Resources. She's here regarding the incident." Ms. Reyes didn't bother with pleasantries. She didn't offer me a seat. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice flat, "the video circulating on all social media platforms violates multiple sections of our media and professional conduct policy. It creates a negative and disruptive public image for Continental Retail Group." "The card was declined, Ms. Reyes," I stated simply, my voice dry. "I was following protocol. Mr. Harrington was the aggressor. He called me an idiot and filmed me without consent." Ms. Reyes offered a practiced, empty nod. "We understand the details, Mr. Peterson. However, the resulting viral attention and the comments section are considered detrimental to our brand integrity. We have been instructed to terminate your employment, effective immediately, for violation of the non-disparagement of brand equity clause." I looked at Jenkins. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He was the local face of betrayal, too cowardly to speak truth to power. "He called me obsolete," I said, my voice low. "He called me a failure, and you're firing me because he was loud enough for the internet to hear." Ms. Reyes placed a thin severance envelope on the desk. "Your pay for the accrued vacation time is enclosed. Please hand over your uniform and badge." That was it. 2 decades of loyalty, reduced to a terse, legalistic dismissal because of the optics, the shallow, cruel image projected by a man who had the power to make his lies into universal truth. My honesty, my work ethic, my dignity, none of it mattered against the digital shadow cast by Mr. Harrington's rage. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the employee badge, David, and placed it on the desk. Then, I unzipped the familiar, worn Bi-Mart vest. As the fabric fell away, I felt a physical lightness, a profound and terrible emptiness. I walked out of that office and through the store, my former home. I was just David Peterson, a 62-year-old unemployed man with no recent job history and a viral video labeling him obsolete. Rock bottom wasn't a metaphor. It was the cold, hard linoleum floor beneath my cheap work shoes. I drove home and sat in the quiet of my living room. The climax of despair was complete. I had nothing left to lose. Everything was gone, reduced to the humiliating narrative engineered by Mr. Harrington. But that overwhelming shame suddenly crystallized into a singular, clear thought. If my honesty couldn't fight his power, then I had to acquire a power that transcended honesty. I had to learn the language of control, the language of Continental Retail Group. I looked at the framed photograph of my late wife, Martha, on the mantel. She was smiling, her eyes wise. "Find the quiet value, David," I remembered her saying years ago. "People always talk about the loud stuff, but the quiet stuff, that's where the real power is." I had a box of Martha's possessions in the attic I hadn't touched since she passed. Maybe, just maybe, the quiet value I needed wasn't on a shelf or in a bank account, but in the memory of the woman who had always seen the value in me, even when the world called me obsolete. The silence was now my fuel. The search began. Chapter 3. The Wife's Legacy. The silence that followed my termination wasn't the silence of peace. It was the deafening quiet of a detonated bomb. I had no job, no immediate prospects, and a viral video labeling me a failure. But that morning, after the HR woman's icy decree, the shame had hardened into a singular, cold clarity. Mr. Harrington had defined my worth based on a faulty cash register transaction. I needed a power that rendered his judgment meaningless. I remembered Martha's words, the ones that had echoed in my mind after the humiliation. People always talk about the loud stuff, but the quiet stuff, that's where the real power is. Martha wasn't loud. She was a librarian, a woman who valued footnotes over headlines. While I brought home my meager paycheck and worried about the daily bills, she moved through the world with a quiet, observant wisdom. Since she passed, I had avoided the attic, where her things were stored. It was a place reserved for grief, too painful to touch. But now, desperation replaced pain. I needed the quiet value she spoke of. I climbed the creaking attic stairs, the air thick with dust and memory. The attic wasn't chaotic. Martha was too organized for that. Her possessions were contained in a series of neat, labeled bins. I ignored the boxes labeled Christmas and old photos, and sought the one I had always been slightly afraid to open, the one simply marked Files and Receipts. It was heavy, tucked into a corner. I brought it downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. the exact spot where I had once placed Mr. Harrington's rejected cat food. The contrast between my current poverty and the potential contained within that unassuming cardboard box was stark. Inside, it was typical Martha. Meticulous tax documents, warranty cards for appliances we no longer owned, and old savings bonds. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing that screamed life-changing wealth. I felt the familiar despair return, the sense that my last hope was just another dead end. I was about to close the lid when I noticed a small, leather-bound notebook tucked beneath a stack of utility bills. It wasn't a diary. Martha wasn't sentimental like that. It was a ledger. Small, neat, filled with her precise, elegant handwriting. The ledger contained columns, meticulously dated, listing small, irregular purchases, shares of stock. Martha hadn't bought gold or property. In the late 90s, when everyone was focused on the immediate tech boom, Martha had quietly invested tiny portions of her librarian's salary into something I'd barely noticed at the time. A local company that managed inventory and logistics for growing retail chains. It was boring, functional, and completely outside the loud, exciting markets Mark Harrington and his peers would have bothered with. The entry stopped 20 years ago. The column simply ended, the final entry recording a total of 48,000 shares in a company called Continental Retail Logistics, CRL. I frowned. CRL. That name sounded vaguely familiar. Continental Retail Group was the parent company that owned Bimart. My hands began to tremble. I grabbed my old laptop, my mind racing. Continental Retail Logistics. Had it been absorbed? Rebranded? I typed the name into a financial search engine. The results hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and dizzy. Continental Retail Logistics had been bought out. Years ago. It had been the quiet, highly valuable logistics backbone, acquired during the massive corporate restructuring that created the very monolith that employed, and then discarded me. Continental Retail Group. And those 48,000 shares? They hadn't been cashed out. They had been converted. The revelation was staggering. Due to stock splits, mergers, and the colossal growth of the retail giant, Martha's forgotten investment hadn't merely grown. It had exploded. My eyes locked onto the number provided by the automated trading history. The raw, terrifying value of the total shares I now owned. $11.7 million. I sank back in my chair, the cardboard box tipping over. My head was spinning. I wasn't just unemployed David, the cashier labeled obsolete. I was the secret owner of over $11 million in a portfolio, primarily consisting of Continental Retail Group stock. Martha, the quiet value. She had invested in the engine that ran the very machine that had just crushed me, and she had done it silently, without fanfare, years before Mr. Harrington was even a name in our lives. The grief for Martha mixed with a profound, almost religious awe. This wasn't a lottery win. It was a legacy of foresight. She hadn't left me money for retirement. She had left me the weapon to fight my own war. She had given me the power that Mark Harrington used against the world. The image of Mr. Harrington's sneering face, "You are obsolete," flashed in my mind, followed by the image of Sophia's sad, quiet eyes. That video, that public shame, had driven me to this attic, to this box, to this extraordinary truth. The money wasn't the point. The power was. I pulled out the most recent brokerage statement from the back of the ledger. It confirmed the staggering valuation and, more importantly, confirmed my status as a significant individual shareholder. This was not enough to buy the entire corporation, but it was certainly enough to buy a seat at the table. My voice, which had been silent for 2 days, shamed into submission, finally returned. It was low, firm, and filled with a resolve colder than Mark Harrington's most expensive granite countertop. "You called me obsolete, Mr. Harrington," I whispered, looking at the stock ticker. "You used your corporation to destroy my dignity. I wonder what happens when the obsolete cashier buys enough of your company to buy the truth." The time for quiet despair was over. The time for quiet, meticulous financial maneuvering, the kind Martha had specialized in, had begun. I had the capital. I had the motivation. Now, I needed the expertise to turn this silent, inherited power into a strategic, deafening reckoning. My next step wasn't a job application. It was a consultation with a very specific, discreet financial analyst. The hunt was on. Chapter 4. Due diligence and the plan. $11 million. The number was a surreal weight, a cosmic joke played on a man who had spent his life calculating change for minimum wage transactions. But the initial shock quickly subsided. replaced by the grim determination that had fueled me since I left Jenkins's office. This wasn't retirement. This was war capital. I knew one thing instantly. I couldn't fight Mr. Harrington, a man steeped in corporate law and financial manipulation, by simply having money. Money is loud, power is quiet, strategic, and often hidden in the footnotes. I needed to learn the footnotes. My first and most crucial move was discretion. I didn't want a loud, celebrity financial planner. I needed someone who specialized in quiet wealth management, the kind of advisor who dealt with old family money and untraceable portfolios. I found her name through an obscure industry bulletin Martha had saved. Anya Sharma, a financial analyst known for her silence and her surgical precision. I arranged the meeting under the name of a distant relative and drove to her sterile, high-rise office in my old pickup truck. Wearing the same clothes I used to wear to Bimart, a deliberate choice. I wanted to see her raw reaction, test her prejudice, and determine if she was capable of seeing the quiet power beneath the appearance of an obsolete man. Anya Sharma, in her sharp black suit and cool, assessing gaze, did not flinch when I walked in. She simply pointed to a chair. The real drama began when she opened the portfolio summary. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "This is an extraordinary portfolio, highly concentrated, remarkably untouched. Your late wife was astute." She paused, then her eyes flickered back to the total valuation. "It's heavily weighted toward Continental Retail Group, CRG, stock, and subsidiaries. Do you have any immediate liquidity goals?" "Yes," I told her, my voice calm, the quietest voice in the room. "My immediate goal is to understand the corporate structure of CRG, specifically its shareholder voting rights, its board hierarchy, and the function of the executive who humiliated me, a man named Mark Harrington." That was the twist for her. She was expecting retirement plans. She got a demand for war strategy. She sat back, studying me with a new, professional respect, the prejudice gone. "This isn't about profit, Ms. Sharma," I explained, leaning forward. "This is about justice, delivered through the mechanisms Mr. Harrington worships. I need to know how to transform this wealth into controlling interest and strategic leverage." Anya, to her credit, responded with immediate, surgical competence. She laid out the plan in terms of share classes, proxy votes, and corporate governance. She became my translator into the arcane language of institutional power. The next 2 months were the most intellectually rigorous period of my life, my climax of effort. If my time at Bimart taught me discipline, my time studying corporate finance taught me ruthless application. I didn't just hire Ms. Sharma, I became her most demanding student. I devoured textbooks on the Securities Exchange Act and the legal intricacies of the CRG's corporate charter. I traded my cash register manuals for balance sheets. I wanted to understand exactly why my current $11 million wasn't enough to simply shut down the entire operation. It wasn't about the volume of money. It was about the percentage of control. My motivation was simple. Every time a legal document confused me, I remembered Mr. Harrington's sneer. Every complex financial model I struggled to grasp was a direct challenge from the man who called me mentally challenged. The anger didn't fuel random chaos. It fueled focused study. I learned that Mr. Harrington wasn't just a loud customer. He was a senior vice president of corporate strategy at CRG. His influence ran deep, especially on the acquisitions and brand integrity subcommittees, the very bodies that had authorized my firing. The specific plan began to crystallize around the concept of the proxy fight and anonymous acquisition. "Your current portfolio gives you influence, Mr. Peterson," Anya explained one day, pointing to a graph that tracked the major shareholders. "But for a public, definitive move, a move that allows you to address the board and the shareholders publicly, you need to shift from an influential figure to an immovable force. You need to acquire just enough additional stock, bought discreetly through various shell corporations, to surprise the board." I realized then that Mr. Harrington's greatest enemy was precisely the tactic he relied on: concealment and systemic opacity. I gave Anya the mandate. I didn't want to buy the entire company. I wanted to buy the moment of truth. I wanted to acquire just enough stock to become the anonymous majority player, the force that controlled the voting outcome of the next major board meeting. The focus narrowed. The goal wasn't just to make money. It was to gain the authority to execute one public, devastating personnel change: Mr. Harrington's termination. Anya was instrumental in setting up the SP Holdings LLC, Shareholder Power Holdings, an anonymous entity designed to quietly scoop up CRG stock over the next few months without raising red flags to the current executives. The company was named, again, with a silent nod to Martha. Silent power. I was no longer just David Peterson. I was the unseen, looming force behind SP Holdings. By the end of the second month, I had transformed. My knowledge of CRG's financial structure was encyclopedic. I understood the quarterly metrics Mark Harrington was judged by, the performance reviews that dictated his bonuses, and the corporate politics that made him untouchable. I had traded my cashier's vest for a virtual suit of financial armor. The education was complete. I had the means, the knowledge, and the silent, terrifying strategic patience Martha had bequeathed me. The funds were secured. The shell company was established. The time for planning was over. The time for the silent acquisition, the phase where the revenge moved from thought to irreversible action, had arrived. I was ready to buy my way back into Continental Retail Group, not as an obsolete employee, but as the master of their financial fate. Chapter 5. The Silent Acquisition. The knowledge acquired in the previous months, the dry language of corporate law, the cold arithmetic of mergers and acquisitions, was finally about to be put to its intended, vengeful use. The spreadsheets were done. The planning was complete. Now, the money Martha left me had to become the weapon. The stock market became my new cash register. Instead of scanning items, I was tracking millions of shares. My battlefield wasn't the brightly lit aisles of Bimart. It was the sterile glow of Ms. Sharma's financial monitors, where fortunes turned on whispers and milliseconds. My directive to Anya was simple, yet strategically complex. Acquire the necessary percentage of Continental Retail Group, CRG, common stock, the minimum required to force a decision at the highest level, without alerting the CRG board to the presence of a hostile, centralized buyer. Anya executed the plan with surgical precision. We used SP Holdings LLC as the central command, but the actual purchases were fragmented. We spread the transactions across multiple small, regional brokerage houses, a technique known as layering or concealment. We bought in small blocks, avoiding the volume thresholds that trigger mandatory SEC disclosure. Staying below the radar, Mark Harrington thought only he possessed the intelligence to navigate. The psychological toll was immense. For every $90 transaction I processed at Bimart, I was now processing $90,000 blocks of CRG stock. It was a terrifying inversion of my entire financial reality. Watching millions of dollars disappear into the market, trusting the complexity of the law to keep my name a secret, was the ultimate test of faith. Faith not in people, but in the systems Mark had idolized. My internal monologue during this phase was pure, cold calculation. Patience, David. Count the shares. Avoid the spotlight. Wait for the percentage. It was the discipline of a cashier, the precision and the patience, applied to a 7-figure scale. The moral irony was never lost on me. I was using Martha's quiet, honest money to execute a covert corporate maneuver that bordered on the very type of financial manipulation Mark Harrington would have sneered at, or, more accurately, charged a fortune for. But I justified it. My objective wasn't profit. It was justice. It was a rescue mission for my own destroyed dignity. There was one moment of high tension, a near miss that almost derailed the entire plan. The market had been unusually volatile. One morning, CRG announced an unexpected, massive stock buyback program designed to consolidate shares and boost executive bonuses. This immediately drove up the price and severely reduced the available floating supply of stock. "They're trying to lock down control," Anya whispered, her face tense as she watched the ticker tape. "Mark Harrington is likely behind this. He knows something is moving, but he doesn't know what." My heart hammered. Mark wasn't a fool. He was simply arrogant. He sensed a disturbance in the force, a large buyer, and was using a defense mechanism. If we hesitated, the available stock would dry up, and we would lose the opportunity to gain the critical leverage needed to command the board. "We move harder," I commanded, the cold conviction of the recently unemployed retail clerk overriding the analyst's caution. "Hit their secondary targets. Buy the entire lot from those smaller regional funds before they can react to the buyback. If he wants a show of force, he'll get one." We spent the next 48 hours executing a series of aggressive, coordinated purchases. The cost was astronomical, chewing through the reserved capital at an alarming rate, but the result was immediate. The buyback effort was stymied, and the CRG board was left scratching its collective head, wondering which institutional giant was fighting their defensive maneuver. It was glorious. I was David, the obsolete cashier, playing corporate defense against Mark Harrington, the ruthless executive, and winning. Finally, after 3 months of intense, calculated buying, Anya called me in for a private meeting. She closed the door, a rare show of formality. She didn't use any market jargon. She just gave me a single number, "We hit the threshold, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice filled with professional awe. "We've acquired 3.1% of Continental Retail Group's outstanding shares. Crucially, the major institutional owners are scattered, and due to a clause in the CRG charter regarding proxy votes and scattered retail ownership, the SP Holdings block effectively gives you the decisive controlling vote necessary to influence major personnel changes at the next board meeting." The twist was complete. The massive financial power I wielded wasn't just money, it was power to vote. I had bought the silence, the surprise, and the leverage. The anonymous shell company, SP Holdings LLC, was now the unseen master of the house, capable of delivering a fatal blow to the arrogant executive who ran the kitchen. I sat there, looking at the printout. I had been fired for costing the company money. I was now the largest unrepresented individual shareholder, in a position to cost the company its senior vice president of corporate strategy. "Good," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the triumphant thunder in my chest. "Now, we wait for the annual board meeting." A week later, the official notification arrived. As the owner of the SP Holdings LLC voting shares, I received an official, elegant invitation to attend the Continental Retail Group annual shareholders meeting. It was a formality, extended to every large shareholder. But for me, it was the final, engraved permission slip. I smiled, a cold, calculated smile I had learned from studying the enemy. Mr. Harrington thought he was playing a powerful game of corporate chess. He had no idea the obsolete cashier had just spent $11 million to become the hand that tipped the board. The time for silent acquisition was over. The time for the loudest reckoning was imminent. Chapter 6. The invitation to the board. The moment the 3.1% threshold was crossed, the air around Continental Retail Group, CRG, changed. I could feel it, even miles away in my quiet living room, studying the endless stream of financial news. The corporate world reacts to unexplained, major stock acquisitions, like a body reacts to an invading virus, with immediate, frantic defense. The official invitation arrived promptly, a thick, heavy envelope containing the formal notice for the annual shareholders meeting. It was elegantly embossed, signifying the kind of exclusive power Mark Harrington held. For me, it wasn't an invitation, it was a subpoena, finally calling me to the stage of the reckoning. I studied the agenda. Item 7, buried deep in the documentation, was the key: executive performance and compensation review. This was where I would make my move. This was the moment I could legally, publicly, and irreversibly execute my justice. Anya Sharma, my silent partner in this hostile strategy, was crucial during this period. She provided the necessary intelligence, feeding me tidbits about the internal panic. "They are terrified, Mr. Peterson," Anya reported during one of our secure calls. "They have analysts working 24/7 trying to pierce the veil of SP Holdings. They assume we are a major private equity fund, possibly aiming for a full hostile takeover. They're spending millions trying to identify you." "And Mark Harrington?" I asked, my voice flat. Anya paused. "He is their chief strategist in this defense. He's furious. He's been lecturing the board about protecting brand integrity from outside raiders, the same self-important rhetoric he used to fire you. He has no idea the David the Cashier he called obsolete." The irony was delicious, but I didn't let it distract me. This was the final step in my transformation. I had bought the shares, acquired the knowledge, and created the anonymity. Now, I had to physically become the man who controlled those millions. I had to replace the worn, inexpensive clothes of David the Cashier with the polished, expensive armor of David, the principal shareholder. I spent a necessary day shopping, a surreal experience that contrasted sharply with my old life. No longer was I searching for the best deal on generic coffee. I was searching for the exact cut of a suit that denoted silent, undeniable power. I chose a dark, custom-tailored suit, conservative, immaculate, expensive, but lacking the flashy, ostentatious details Mark favored. My style had to be quiet authority, not loud arrogance. The day of the annual shareholders meeting was cold and clear, a perfect day for corporate execution. The meeting was held in the executive boardroom on the top floor of the CRG corporate headquarters, a monolithic glass and steel tower that stood as the physical monument to Mark Harrington's success. I drove my old pickup truck, the one I used to take to Bimart, to a nearby public garage and walked the final few blocks. That walk was the entire story condensed into 10 minutes. With every step, I shed the skin of the cashier and embraced the identity of the executive. I remember standing in the marble lobby, the air conditioning so cold it felt sterile. Everything was polished, expensive, and silent, a world away from the busy, slightly sticky floors of Bimart. Anya met me there, herself looking impeccably professional, carrying the single, thin binder containing all the documents needed to execute the final act. "Remember the plan, Mr. Peterson," Anya murmured, checking my tie. "You are silent until item 7. You are simply the principal from SP Holdings. You will not make eye contact with Harrington. You observe. You are the immovable object." "I remember," I confirmed, my voice a low, steady rumble. I felt unnaturally calm. The nervous energy had burned away long ago, replaced by the cold, clear focus of my purpose. We were escorted through the various levels of security until we reached the executive floor. The boardroom was vast, circular, with a panoramic view of the entire city, the kind of room that whispered secrets and sealed fates. The board members were already assembled, a collection of powerful, middle-aged men and women, all looking anxious and concerned. And there he was, Mark D. Harrington. He was standing near the coffee station, holding court, his suit bespoke, his hair perfectly slicked back. He was performing, lecturing a few junior board members on the latest defense strategy against the rumored hostile buyer. His back was to me. As Anya and I entered, a hush fell over the room. Everyone was waiting for the mysterious SP Holdings principal. Harrington turned slowly, scanning the doorway. His eyes met mine and passed right over me, focusing instead on Anya, assuming the young, sharp woman in the expensive suit must be the principal. Anya, a master of silence, offered a slight, cool nod and steered me toward a seat at the table. She sat next to me. Harrington, arrogant and dismissive, finally approached our seats, but addressed Anya entirely. "Ms. Sharma, is it?" Harrington extended a hand to Anya, his handshake firm and condescending. "I assume you represent SP Holdings. I hope we can resolve any misunderstandings about the current valuation of our stock. We are not interested in raids." Anya maintained her composure perfectly. "Mr. Harrington," she said smoothly, "I am an advisor to SP Holdings. My client is seated next to me." Harrington's expression shifted immediately from patronizing to annoyed. He barely spared me a glance. He looked at my suit, my plain features, and assumed I was a technical advisor, a bodyguard, or perhaps just a relative. He extended his hand, but his eyes were already scanning the room for the real threat. "My apologies," Harrington muttered, his tone clipped. "And you are?" I took his hand. His grasp was firm, demanding, just as I remembered from the store counter. His touch sent a tremor through me, not of fear, but a profound, concentrated rage. I held his gaze, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "My name is David Peterson," I replied, my voice calm and neutral. "And I am the principal." He immediately dropped my hand, the name David Peterson meaning nothing to him. But the sheer audacity, the wrongness of a man dressed like me holding that title, caused him to blanch slightly. He quickly recovered, forcing a professional, condescending smile. "A pleasure, Mr. Peterson. I trust you are prepared to discuss item 7 in detail." He had no idea. He didn't recognize the man who bagged his expensive cat food. He didn't see the cashier he called obsolete. He just saw an unknown, unremarkable man with a terrifying amount of voting power. I said nothing more. I simply nodded, the power of my silence now absolute. I had walked into his temple, sat at his table, and he had looked straight through me. The meeting began. The tension in the room, particularly from Mark, was unbearable. He was trapped in the room with the ghost who was about to dismantle his career, and he didn't even know his name. The climax of strategy was complete. The time for the reckoning had arrived. Chapter 7. When the executive pays the price. The meeting began, and the minutes stretched into hours. Items 1 through 6, routine reports on financial health, projected growth, and corporate social responsibility, were delivered with the practiced, glossy sheen typical of executive boardrooms. I sat there, the silent, anonymous sword, watching the drama unfold. Mark Harrington was, predictably, the star of the show. He spoke frequently, his voice loud and articulate, offering confident projections and self-congratulatory analyses. He moved with the easy entitlement of a man who believed the room revolved around his intellect. He was the picture of success, and every word he uttered underscored the contempt he felt for anyone he deemed obsolete. During a discussion about brand image, he even brought up the infamous viral video, without naming me, of course. "We have taken aggressive steps to protect brand integrity," Mark declared, his posture rigid with self-importance. We quickly dealt with a recent regrettable incident involving an incompetent, non-compliant employee whose failure to follow simple procedure created a negative, viral distraction. That employee was terminated immediately. We must maintain high standards of performance to defend our shareholder value. The words hit me, not with pain, but with a cold, quiet satisfaction. He was defending my firing, celebrating my humiliation. Just minutes before I was about to dismantle his entire life. The moral dichotomy of our positions was about to flip with a vengeance. Anya leaned over, her voice barely audible. Item 7 is next, Mr. Peterson. Stay focused. I am, I replied, my gaze locked on Mark. The chairman, a kindly but tired-looking man, introduced the next topic. Item 7, Executive Performance and Compensation Review. Mark Harrington smiled, rising smoothly to his feet. This was his moment. He had prepped a long, detailed presentation, justifying his massive bonus and projecting his critical role in future acquisitions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mark began, pulling out a sleek remote for his presentation. As Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy, I would like to quickly outline the critical value my office provides. This was the climax. I raised my hand, a slow, deliberate, quiet gesture. The chairman paused, looking slightly startled. Yes, Mr. Peterson. An early question? All eyes snapped to me. Mark frowned, annoyed by the interruption. He finally addressed me directly, his condescension palpable. Mr. Peterson, with all due respect, perhaps you could hold your retail-level questions until after the professional presentation. I didn't react to the insult. I stood up, adjusting my tailored suit jacket, allowing my silence to hold the room. Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Harrington begins his defensive performance, I have a motion, I stated clearly. As the principal shareholder representing the decisive block of SP Holdings, I move to introduce a motion for an immediate performance review and vote of no confidence regarding the employment of the Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy, Mr. Mark Harrington. The boardroom erupted. Whispers exploded around the table. Board members began protesting, demanding justification. Mark's presentation remote slipped from his stunned fingers, clattering onto the polished floor. Out of order! This is preposterous! Mark shouted, his face instantly turning scarlet. You have no standing. This is a corporate raid. The chairman, sensing the legal seriousness of the motion, backed by a decisive voting bloc, hammered his gavel. Order, Mr. Peterson. You must provide justification for this sudden motion. I nodded, maintaining the power of silence until the noise subsided. The justification is simple, Mr. Chairman, I explained, addressing the room, not Mark. My firm, SP Holdings, believes Mr. Harrington has demonstrably failed to uphold the fiduciary duty required of his office, specifically regarding the protection of brand equity and shareholder integrity. I submit that Mr. Harrington has recklessly exposed the company to extreme public relations liability and has repeatedly demonstrated poor judgment and profound, unmanaged arrogance, creating a toxic environment that harms employee morale and brand perception. I looked directly at Mark, whose jaw was slack with shock. The evidence is publicly available, I continued, my voice gaining volume and steel. I refer you all to the viral video circulated 3 months ago, titled By Mart's Worst Employee, where Mr. Harrington, on company time, publicly slandered a long-time, compliant employee, recording and distributing this act of cruelty, violating no less than 4 HR policies on conduct and brand image. He called that man obsolete, incompetent, and a retired failure, for the sole reason that Mr. Harrington's own company credit card was declined. The room was stone silent. The board members, horrified, exchanged stunned glances. They knew the video. They just didn't know Mark was the executive in it. He created the very incompetence he claims to fight, I concluded. And he cost the company a good employee while exposing us to massive liability. This is not performance. This is a liability. The chairman, bound by the charter, could not ignore the majority voting power. The motion is seconded. We must proceed to the vote. The vote was quick and devastating. The institutional shareholders, realizing that siding with the man in the embarrassing viral video was a massive public risk, voted with SP Holdings. The result was announced in a chilling monotone. The motion passes. Mark D. Harrington is relieved of his duties, effective immediately. Mark stood frozen, his face pale, his empire crumbling around him. The victory was absolute. Then came the final twist. Mark found his voice, a high-pitched, desperate squeak. "You, who are you? This is a vendetta. Who are you to do this to me?" I stood up fully, walking slowly around the table, until I was standing directly over him. The height difference slight, but the power differential immense. I looked down at the man who had called me obsolete. "I am David Peterson, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I am the cashier you filmed, the retired failure, the one who was mentally challenged and obsolete at the checkout counter 3 months ago when your company card was declined." Mark staggered back, physically recoiling from the truth. The realization hit him. He hadn't been fighting a corporate raider. He had been fighting the victim he left for dead. I pulled out the severance envelope Ms. Doi Tu Reyes had given me months ago and dropped it onto the table in front of him. It was a final, devastating insult. "You said I was fired," I stated, my voice cold as ice. "I believe you used the phrase, 'enjoy your retirement, failure.'" I then looked at the chairman, offering a final, impeccable professional gesture. "Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn this meeting. I believe the matter of executive performance has been addressed." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of that boardroom, leaving the stunned silence, the defeated executive, and the horrified board members behind. The vengeance wasn't just sweet. It was impeccably legal. I had been fired for optics. I had fired him for performance. The price was paid, and the obsolete cashier had bought himself a new life. Chapter 8. Coffee and Shares. The moment the boardroom doors closed behind me, shutting out the horrified silence of the Continental Retail Group, CRG board, I felt an extraordinary lightness. It wasn't the giddy exhilaration of a lottery winner. It was the quiet, profound relief of a man who had finally paid an impossible debt. I hadn't just fired Mark Harrington. I had redeemed the dignity he stole from me on the linoleum floor of Bimart. Anya met me in the hall. She was beaming, her professional cool momentarily fractured by sheer triumph. "Mr. Peterson," she breathed, "that was the most effective, surgical execution I have ever witnessed. You didn't just win. You rewrote their governance charter in 20 minutes. What now?" I looked down at the briefcase holding the executed documents, the proof of my new, colossal power. "Now," I replied, my voice steady. We maintained the silence. We slipped out of the monolithic CRG tower before the news hit the wire. The irony was perfect. I, who had been fired for being too public, via the viral video, now needed to be the ghost, the invisible force that dictated policy without seeking the spotlight. The corporate world erupted within the hour. Mark Harrington's firing, the sudden, brutal execution of a powerful senior VP based on a single, as decisive vote by an unknown entity, SP Holdings, was immediately the financial headline of the year. The initial report speculated wildly. Hostile takeover? Foreign raider? Insider trading? No one, not the stock market analysts, not the corporate reporters, and certainly not the remaining CRG executives, connected the anonymous, multi-million-dollar force to the 62-year-old cashier Mark had publicly humiliated. This was the beautiful silence of my victory. Mark's punishment was not just the loss of his job and his millions in deferred bonuses. It was the unending, maddening mystery of his defeat. He knew who had done it, but he could never prove it. His legal and financial arrogance had built the very walls that imprisoned him. I decided my role immediately. I would not become the CEO. I would not seek a position on the board. The life of high-stakes corporate politics, the world of Mark Harrington, was loud and ultimately empty. I had conquered that world, but I had no desire to live in it. I maintained SP Holdings as a silent, protective influence. I used my voting power quietly, through Anya, to push for changes Mark Harrington would have ridiculed: better working conditions, increased wages for low-level employees, and the establishment of a robust employee dignity policy that made harassment from executives legally untenable. I became the silent conscience of CRG. My life, outside of my weekly meetings with Anya, returned to the quiet simplicity Martha had loved. I sold the condo and bought a small, comfortable house with a good-sized yard, where I could read and maintain a small workshop. My greatest luxury was no longer money. It was time and peace. My final, necessary pilgrimage was to the old Bimart. I drove the pickup truck, the same one I used to own, to the parking lot, but I didn't go inside. I sat for a long time, sipping coffee from a thermos, watching the employees file in for their shift. I saw Mr. Jenkins. He looked relieved, but exhausted. I saw the manager who had bagged next to me, still doing the same quiet, honest work. I realized then that my victory wasn't just about Mark. It was about protecting these people from the contempt of men like him. Just before driving away, I sent one final, anonymous, secure email through SP Holdings to Mr. Jenkins's personal account. It contained no text, only a single attachment, a clean, professionally drafted document detailing a $100,000 grant to the Bi-Mart Outlet's Employee Assistance Fund, requiring only that Mr. Jenkins personally oversee its distribution based on need and fairness. I drove home that day, the past finally settled. I sat in my new, sunlit kitchen, staring at the framed photograph of Martha. I finally understood the full scope of her legacy. She didn't just leave me money, she left me the means to rewrite my own ending, using her foresight to defeat my enemy's arrogance. Mark Harrington called me obsolete, but my honesty, my work ethic, and the quiet patience I learned bagging groceries had been the very qualities that allowed me to study the system, acquire the shares, and execute the final, perfect justice. The ultimate message I want to leave with you is this. The true measure of a person is not the number on their paycheck or the title on their door. It's the dignity they carry when the world tries to strip it away. I was fired for being perceived as a failure. I walked away a millionaire, not because of the money, but because I finally earned the right to look Mark Harrington in the eye and prove that the obsolete man was him. The one whose arrogance had blinded him to the quiet value that ultimately controlled his fate. I finished my coffee, closed the briefcase, and smiled. The reckoning was complete, and the quiet life, earned through fire and finance, was finally mine.